A woman walked up to the king on the street. She said, "This woman came to me yesterday. We agreed to eat my son, and we did. Today I said, 'Now give up your son so we can eat him too.' She hid her son, and then she asked the king for justice."
To understand how two women ended up in that conversation, you need to understand what Samaria had been living through. Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, had surrounded the city of Samaria with his entire army. He had sealed every gate. He had cut every supply line. He was not attacking the city. He was waiting for the city to destroy itself from the inside, and it was working. The siege had gone on so long that the city had completely run out of food. Not regular food, everything. The text of 2 Kings 6 tells us with a specificity that is almost unbearable to read, that a donkey's head, not the meat, not the good parts, just the skull of a donkey, was selling for 80 pieces of silver. To put that in context, 80 pieces of silver was roughly equivalent to 2 years of wages for a working man in ancient Israel. 2 years of wages for a donkey's skull, for something that in any normal time would have been thrown away. And that was not even the lowest point. A small measure of dove dung, historians believe this was being used as fuel or possibly even consumed in desperation, was selling for 5 pieces of silver. The economy of Samaria had completely collapsed. Whatever could be sold was being sold. Whatever could be eaten was being eaten. And when the last of those things ran out, people began to look at each other. The king of Israel, his name was Jehoram, the son of Ahab, was walking the city walls. This was something kings did during sieges. They walked the walls to be seen by their people below, to show they had not run, to perform the stability of a ruler even when there was nothing stable left to offer. Jehoram had been doing this for weeks. He had walked these walls and looked down at his city dying in slow motion, and looked out at the Aramean army, patient and unmovable in the distance. He had no answer. He had no plan. And the walls he walked were the only thing keeping him from having to admit that to his face.
At some point during one of these wall walks, a woman called up to him from below, "Help me, my lord king." And the king said, "What is wrong with you? Do you want me to help you from the threshing floor or from the winepress? I have nothing. I have no grain to offer you. There is nothing left in my store." But the woman said, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we will eat my son.'" She and another woman had made an agreement. Both were starving. Both had children. Both had reached the point where the walls of the thinkable had moved. And in that specific, desperate logic, the logic of people who have been inside a siege long enough that nothing outside it seems real anymore, they made a deal. One child at a time. The first woman's son first, then the second woman's son. It was, in the collapsed moral universe of that city at that moment, a kind of plan, a kind of mercy even, or at least that is what starvation had convinced them it was. The first mother kept her end of the agreement. The text does not describe what happened. It states it in the same matter-of-fact tone it has used for everything else in this chapter. And then the next day came, and the first mother went to the second and said, "Now it is your son's turn." And the second mother hid her child. She backed out. She took her son and she hid him, and she refused to honor what they had agreed. And so the first mother, the one who had kept her end of the deal, walked to the king to file a complaint, to get justice. She believed she was owed something. She thought she was in the right.
When the king heard what the woman said, the Bible says he tore his clothes. That was a standard expression of extreme grief and distress in the ancient world. But what happens next is one of the most unexpectedly human details in the entire book of Kings. Underneath his royal robes, the outer garments of a ruling monarch, the king had been wearing sackcloth directly against his skin. The tearing of his outer clothes revealed it to everyone watching. Sackcloth was the material of mourning, of penitence, of private grief made physical. The king of Israel had been walking his city walls and sitting in his throne room in his king's robes the whole time, with secret mourning cloth against his skin. He had been grieving privately for his people, while publicly trying to maintain the appearance of a functioning ruler. The torn clothes revealed everything he had been hiding. And then the grief became rage.
He blamed Elisha the prophet. He said, "May God deal with me severely if the head of Elisha son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." He sent a messenger with orders to execute Elisha. But Elisha already knew the messenger was coming. The text says this without explanation, as if it is obvious that a prophet would know these things. He told the elders with him, "Hold the door. A murderer is sending someone for my head. When the man comes, hold the door against him. The king himself will be right behind." And he was. The king came himself to Elisha's door, in torn robes with sackcloth showing, a king who had come completely undone. And he said, "This evil is from God. Why should I wait for God any longer?"
Elisha's response to the king standing at his door in sackcloth and rage was a prophecy so specific and so impossible that the king's senior officer laughed out loud when he heard it. Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. Tomorrow, not eventually, not someday, tomorrow at this exact time, a measure of fine flour will sell for 1 shekel and 2 measures of barley for 1 shekel at the gate of Samaria." Food so cheap it would have seemed insane even before the siege began. The officer standing next to the king said, "Even if God made windows in heaven, could this happen?" And Elisha said, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." That same night, 4 men with leprosy were sitting outside the city gate. They could not go inside the city where people were starving. They could not stay where they were, or they would die. So they decided to walk to the Aramean camp and surrender. If the Arameans killed them, they were dead anyway. If they showed mercy, they might eat. They had nothing to lose. They walked to the camp in the dark, and the entire camp was empty. Every tent standing, every horse and donkey still tied, every pot of food still sitting, all the silver and gold left behind. The Aramean army, the entire army that had besieged Samaria, was gone, because the Lord had caused them to hear the sound of a great army approaching, chariots, horses, the sound of a massive allied force. Convinced that Israel had hired Egyptian and Hittite armies against them, the Arameans panicked and ran, in the middle of the night, abandoning everything. The 4 men with leprosy walked through the abandoned camp, eating and drinking. They carried off silver and gold and hid it. Then one of them stopped and said, "What we are doing is not right. This is a day of good news. If we stay silent until morning, punishment will find us." They went back to the city gate and called out to the gatekeepers. Word reached the palace. The king, suspicious even now, even in the middle of potential salvation, thought it might be an Aramean trap. He sent scouts to verify. It was real. The camp was real. The army was gone. The food was real.
The people of Samaria went out and plundered the Aramean camp. The text says they went out and plundered it. The word used implies a complete and total stripping. They took everything. And exactly as Elisha had said, a measure of fine flour sold for 1 shekel, 2 measures of barley for 1 shekel, at the gate of Samaria. The famine ended in a single morning. A city that had been selling donkey skulls for 2 years of wages was suddenly standing in an abandoned camp full of everything they had needed. The reversal was so total and so sudden that it must have felt like a collective hallucination even as it was happening. The king appointed his senior officer, the one who had laughed at Elisha's prophecy, to oversee the city gate during the rush. He was stationed there as thousands of people who had been starving for months stampeded out to reach the food. The crowd trampled him. He died in the gate. He saw the flour selling for 1 shekel with his own eyes. He did not eat any of it, exactly as Elisha had said. The man who laughed at the prophecy died in the proof of it, word for word. The prophecy was complete.
2 Kings 6 is not a story about 2 monsters. It is a story about what a prolonged siege does to people. The 2 women who made their deal did not make it because they were evil. They made it because they had been inside those walls long enough that the limits of the imaginable had shifted entirely. Starvation does that. Prolonged desperation does that. The boundaries of what a person believes they are capable of and what they believe is permissible move under sustained pressure. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with, but it is documented, and the Bible records it without commentary, without judgment, without even pausing to explain it. The second mother who hid her son is never condemned in the text. She never speaks. We do not know what happened to her or her child after the famine ended.
The first mother who kept the deal, we do not know what happened to her either. They appear for exactly the length of time it takes to tell the story, and then the narrative moves on to the next thing. They were important enough to be recorded, not important enough to be named. This is 2 Kings 6. This is Bible True Crime. And there are more stories buried exactly like this, in chapters nobody reads, in verses people skip over. We are going to find every single one.